Now, in the current day, the climate and landscape for video games has become vastly more intense and demanding than, say, 20 years ago. Before, it was about offering one of two things: either something so monumentally asinine that it grabs you by sheer amusement or general word of mouth, or it was a story-based drama that entertained you with complex and nuanced characters, engaging writing, and intelligently constructed narratives.
I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them.
There was more of an emphasis on quality over quantity back then, even if some of the works that were hitting the shelves looked like your mate's college project had been sold for cheap and rendered out on Windows XP.
It's funny because it's true.
But predominantly, there were very few misses back in my time. Either that, or people were so numbingly fascinated with flashy colours and little depth it was easy enough to entertain them. Your choices then were either arcades or cartridge plays, if you could afford a Sega Master System, PS1 or GameCube, for impactful moments or riveting delights. But as the years have progressed, things have become a lot more divisive, to the point you probably have less hassle eating meat at a fucking vegan rally.
That's a little fucked up, no?
Oh, it's super fucked up.
Suddenly it was about who had the better graphics, the visual distinctions, or which name brand offered newer, shinier assets of fashionable add-ons. The concern for agency, captivation and wonder was lost when all people wanted was an adrenaline rush with none of the build. A spectacle without substance, you could say.
No, he's got a point.
Evidenced further by the fact that your mate's room was housing enough copies of the same fucking franchise they could be repurposed to build a dam. But it would seem that a few developers recognised the diluted state of the gaming world right now and saw the minimal success and growing criticisms that were coming from repeated installments and, surprisingly, superhero games.
He's out of line, but he's right.
The superhero genre has been utilised in practically every form of media these days, to the point that all that's missing is probably a Shakespearean rendition of the Avengers to top off that shit-tacular cake that's primarily comprised of the MCU.
They'll never know what you sacrificed for them.
Morning.
God, you're making me beat up Graham.
However, one thing people often think about after watching an energetic universe of storytelling like superhero movies used to be was how would I play them? How would I tailor the story to my own ideas? Well, it appears that Square Enix and Edios-Montreal have got you covered, with a reimagined tale that focuses on our beloved Guardians of the Galaxy, with aspects of it being worked to reflect and reference the comic and movie iterations of these characters, in an entirely original story that I believe is set within the Avengers universe from the 2020 video game based on this reference.
Avengers, assemble!
What kind of name is Avengers?
And the plot follows the Guardians as they try to make a name for themselves as guns for hire, with both Gamora and Drax being recent additions to the crew as they traverse a rather unstable environment looking for a beast to bring to Lady Hellbender for a sizable profit to get them off the ground. In their hunt for such a prize though, both Quill and Rocket unleash what will become the antagonist to the story, Magus, a being initially from the Infinity Stone belonging to Adam Warlock that acts as both a dark side or alter ego to Warlock that becomes actualized in his form by the end, and at that point Quill manages to defeat by forcing Magus back inside the stone and giving it back to Warlock, who separated it from himself initially as he felt it becoming a threat. But throughout the game, Magus is living within Quill's adopted daughter Nikki as the Promise, which is Magus enacting his powers by tapping into people's deepest desires and trapping them in fictionalized promises and realities of what life could look like for them, whilst he takes their life force for himself.
You dick!
And as things progress, he steadily collects much of the galaxy, including the Nova Corps, Ravagers, Grand Unifier Raker, Nikki, and he almost succeeds in taking Drax. A point of which is done by using the family that he lost to Thanos, with the team having to venture into his mind with the help of Mantis to convince him to reject the very idea of what he's offering. The functionality of the game and the premise itself is built on decision-based gameplay that runs you through a variety of options during the cutscenes that determine the course of events and relationships to those around you. Like for example, when discussing the very crisis that's about to hit the galaxy with the Wildmind. If you say the wrong sequence, it will leave you without an ally in the final battle against the Church of Truth, whereas if you succeed, you'll have a valuable assist with them providing defense while you're able to infiltrate the main headquarters and take out the enemy. This style of gameplay isn't normally for me though, as I prefer being able to physically immerse myself within the characters and environment by having full control, which honestly turned me off to playing the Telltale versions of the Guardians and The Walking Dead despite how well revered they are. However, this game managed to find a balance between both a fully fleshed out, nuanced and considerate story that gives you room as well to fly around, drop bombs, throw fire and shoot roots as just a few possibilities to shake up the playing field in your favour. The fault of this game though, in my opinion, is not being able to perform as the other Guardians, as personally after a while I found it frustrating to have to activate them and focus on what I needed to do as well, but I guess that's the territory that comes from being a leader.
I am the truest repairman!
One thing I was concerned about though heading into this game was how well the cast would gel, given the frame of reference we've had for nearly a decade from the MCU iterations of these characters, and how involved would their respective journeys be? How charismatic would they be? Would the comedic chops level up or weigh it down? How quickly would they snatch my heart as their cinematic counterparts did? And would they operate at an organic level? All interesting questions, but allow me to assure you, if you're yet to play this, that this does in fact bear similarities to the Guardians we know and love, but it functions as its own entity.
Cool.
The humour and dialogue do feel like you're being fist fucked after a while, to the point that I had to genuinely turn it down because Rocket was nattering so much in the background, but otherwise the vibe is there. The atmosphere is appropriate, the tone is the irreverent slapstick style we've grown to expect from them, and it does a good job at conveying the hidden benignity that makes this group so profound. Our core five are everything that you could want them to be and more, even sharing some beats with the movie counterparts, a fact of which is never more evident than with Drax. This version is just as traumatized from losing his family to Thanos, but after going on a vengeful warpath to take the Titan out following these actions, he winds up joining the Guardians as a means to try and do good in life. Drax would go on to suppress his rage and grief over this until the Promise unlocked it, and honestly, I never believed it was possible, but Drax's internal struggle during this would become the clincher of the entire story for me. The whole sequence inside of his mind sold me on this and even brought a fucking tear to my eye.
Are you crying? Am I crying? No, I'm not crying. You're crying.
Then, our beloved Raccoon shares a lot of what we've seen with him in the movies, but much of his story is explained through the background chatter, so if you want any of the context behind his history, then you'll really need to pay attention. Like in the first mission, for example, he references his friends being locked up with him during his youth, likely implying the recently debuted Lila from the movies. And interestingly, the relationship he has with Groot here is incredible, as there's clearly something richly established between the two prior to meeting them here, as Rocket's deeply protective over Groot. Then, to our favourite force of nature himself, he has a lot more character than the first movie was able to provide, with switch-ups to his delivery and tones, plus he even audibly laughs, which is unsettling at first, but occurs often enough that you start to grow attached to hearing such personality from the walking wooden board. Then as for our deadliest lass who will break her foot off in your ass, Gamora is executed beautifully, with greater emotional depth being displayed, with a tragic history to that of which we've received in the MCU, and none of the love connection to Quill, which allows their relationship to flourish and come across more naturally. She's more expressionate, endearing and protective here as well, and the softer tone from the actress Kimberly Sue Murray makes her easier to watch and understand, whilst enforcing the idea that she is indeed as lethal as the moniker says. And that just leaves our self-professed leader, Star-Lord.
Hey, you know what? There's another name you might know me by.
Star-Lord.
Who?
Star-Lord, man. Legendary outlaw.
Quill's backstory here winds up with Chris Pratt's version in the MCU that lands with both of them losing their mothers, but in very different ways. There's a lot of mystery left regarding Quill's heritage and his father, and it's connected to the blasters that he's used throughout the game and what he's able to achieve with them, which I hope will be explored in a sequel potentially, but he's actually abducted by Chitauri in this version of events, where it's subtly explained that he's used against their enemies. However, as this transpired, Meredith was killed.
In the hell do you think you are? You killed my mother!
The qualities to Quill don't come off as charming as what Chris is able to deliver in the MCU, but that might come from his natural charisma, to be honest. The qualities of this version of Quill are his marksmanship, quippy banter, and the humorous nature all round. So I don't mean to sound like I'm souring on this version of Quill, but he's no Star-Lord from the MCU. Otherwise, he's perfectly likeable and a decent adaptation of the character.
Ain't no thing like me except me.
And fuck me, it doesn't stop there either. The games that involve the additional assortment of bananas have something to offer here, and in some cases become more integral to the plot than our main protagonists. Mantis is seriously watered down in the MCU compared to this portrayal of her, with her abilities including foresight and manipulation on a grander scale, which makes for some entertaining spots to say the least. Adam Warlock is extremely Shakespearean in his presence and language, which utilises Old English to emphasise his age and intelligence, so it makes me wonder what the fuck went wrong here.
Who threw this thing at me? Baby.
Then as for Nikki, she is possibly the sweetest inclusion in this entire escapade, who's an aspiring Nova Corps officer turned Guardian by the end with a ridiculous Captain Marvel style haircut, but her story aligns with that of the Guardians where it's something messed up and she fits in perfectly with them. She's a genuine delight to be around in both the beginning, middle and end, with the actress killing it in line delivery and acting, and I wouldn't be opposed quite honestly to seeing her introduced in the MCU at some point, provided she's written with a shred of dignity and respect that this version is offered.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
And as for our villains, Magus was simply built to be an arsehole that you mock in the final minutes of the game. Reiko was a more conflicted antagonist than anything else due to the manipulation by Magus, and Lady Hellbender is, well, let's be honest. The exploitative angle that this story took by twisting everyone's anguish, trauma and pain into power was fucked up, but truthfully feels appropriate for a title with the Guardians in it. The point to the Guardians is that they're the most broken characters in the galaxy, and rightfully anyone that joins them must have that factor as well. But that could include the villains in this case too. These guys weren't functioning to the degree that say the High Evolutionary was in terms of his evilness, but they were effective in their own right. Overall, this is a fantastic cinematic game that bizarrely feels more refined and fleshed out with time for everybody's backstories, long-winded expositions that held my attention, and the flow of the whole thing was seamless, with little mentions becoming larger aspects that provide for the Guardians in a different way later on. Like a seemingly throwaway line from Drax about hunting the legendary Fin Fang Foom for Lady Hellbender that the group initially dismiss, until they become desperate for her support later on and actually go in search of the fucking beast. The action's heavy in pace with a balance of drama and levity that, as I said, gives time to everyone. The action admittedly though can become rather repetitive after a bit, but that's only noticeable if you're finding yourself bored. But for me, every action sequence was enjoyable as fuck. The character interactions were reminiscent of our movie Magic Makers, the emotional beats hit heavier than expected, and if you're willing to interact with everything and everyone around your environment, you'll find it to be a rather rewarding experience. And if you do this, you'll pick up some delightful details that will fill you in a little more regarding the world building, and they might even spin off into some ridiculous segments that you'll only discover upon replaying the game. Everyone has a role to play in this, with clever seeding for future plot points. Every choice can impact the result, which I've found from playing this 3 times already, and there's a foot-thumping soundtrack that catches those joyful vibes of the original Guardians music, accompanied by a list of songs that don't particularly resonate in the same way as James Gunn's able to achieve with them, but you'll still have fun with them either way.
The melody is pleasant.
So if you haven't figured it out yet, you need to go out your way to check this game out, especially coming off the heels of the Guardians' final cinematic installment. That's all I've got for this one though. I greatly appreciate you stopping by. Throw some suggestions of other titles you'd like to see me check out and review in the future, but until then everyone, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe if you've not already, and until next time, take care, and I will see you soon.